There is a reason some historians still pause before telling this story, because if even one small detail had unfolded differently, one man would never have walked through the main gate of Auschwitz alive, and the world might never have learned how courage, patience, and extraordinary timing combined in one of the most astonishing escape stories connected to the camp. On the surface, the figure moving with steady confidence toward the guarded exit appeared to be an ordinary SS officer carrying out another routine assignment. His uniform looked correct. His posture showed discipline. His pace never suggested hesitation. Every movement blended naturally into the rhythm of one of the most heavily guarded places in occupied Europe. Yet beneath that uniform was not an officer at all. According to accounts associated with this remarkable escape, the man taking those measured steps had once stood behind the barbed wire as a prisoner. In just a few moments, everything would depend not on speed, strength, or luck alone, but on whether every tiny observation he had made over countless days would prove accurate. Before understanding how such an escape became possible, it is important to understand why so many believed it could never happen. Auschwitz was not simply a prison. It was a vast and carefully organized complex designed around constant control. Every entrance, every road, every work detail, and every administrative office followed strict routines intended to leave little room for uncertainty. Guards worked according to schedules. Documents moved through official channels. Uniforms carried authority that few dared question. Every individual inside the system occupied a defined role, and every unexpected action attracted attention. For the prisoners, daily life revolved around survival through discipline, endurance, and quiet observation. Every morning began with routines that rarely changed. Every movement was monitored. Every assignment followed instructions established long before sunrise. Under such conditions, the idea of simply running away belonged more to imagination than reality. Few opportunities existed, and those that appeared often disappeared almost immediately. Yet history occasionally reminds us that even the strongest systems are operated by people, and wherever people exist, patterns begin to form. Some notice those patterns. Fewer understand them. Only a very small number possess the patience to build an impossible plan around them. Among the many prisoners whose names have faded into history, this story follows one man whose exact identity remains uncertain in the title itself. So his experience represents the documented circumstances rather than an invented legend. Day after day, while exhaustion surrounded him, he quietly paid attention to details most people would never consider important. He watched how officers walked. He noticed how paperwork changed hands. He observed which vehicles arrived at certain hours, which gates opened first, and how confidence often replaced close inspection when authority appeared genuine. These observations did not immediately create an escape plan. Instead, they slowly assembled themselves into something far more dangerous, an idea so unlikely that even imagining it required extraordinary courage. If escaping as a prisoner seemed impossible, perhaps surviving depended on no longer appearing to be one. That thought remained hidden, growing silently as each passing day revealed another small piece of the system. Long before anyone realized what was happening, the first stage of an extraordinary escape had already begun, not outside the fences, but inside the mind of the man who understood that the greatest disguise might not be hiding from the system at all, but convincing the system that it was looking at one of its own. As the days turned into weeks, survival depended as much on observation as endurance. The prisoner understood that every hour inside the camp followed a rhythm that rarely changed, and that rhythm slowly became more valuable than anything else around him. Guards reported for duty according to fixed schedules. Administrative clerks carried stacks of documents between offices at nearly the same time each day. Supply vehicles entered through designated gates, while workers moved equipment under constant supervision. Nothing appeared random. Every routine reflected an organization that valued order above all else, and that very consistency offered the only possibility for someone patient enough to notice it. Rather than allowing fear to consume every thought, he began quietly studying the world surrounding him. He memorized the distance between checkpoints, the direction officers usually approached from, and the moments when attention shifted from one task to another. He noticed that experienced officers often walked with calm confidence instead of urgency. Their authority came not from loud voices, but from complete certainty that everyone else would move aside without question. That confidence became one of the most important lessons he would ever learn. At the same time, he recognized that uniforms alone did not create authority. Every detail mattered. The proper cap, the correct posture, the measured pace, the way documents were held. Even the brief exchange of greetings between personnel followed familiar patterns. A single mistake could invite another glance, and another glance could raise questions that no disguise could answer. The prisoner therefore focused first on understanding behavior rather than clothing. He believed that appearance without confidence would never survive close observation. While carrying out ordinary assignments, he quietly collected fragments of information that seemed meaningless when viewed separately. Which offices remained busiest during the morning? Which gates handled vehicle traffic? Which administrative corridors were crowded and which remained almost empty? Which officers preferred strict formality and which barely acknowledged the people around them? Piece by piece, these observations formed a detailed picture of how the system functioned. He never imagined that one discovery alone would create an escape. Instead, he understood that success, if it were ever possible, would require hundreds of small truths fitting together without contradiction. Time also taught him another important lesson. Even the most disciplined organization depended on routine, and routine often encouraged people to expect familiar sights instead of questioning them. Someone who appeared to belong frequently attracted less attention than someone behaving nervously. That realization transformed the impossible idea developing inside his mind into something that could at least be examined. It was still unbelievably dangerous. It still depended on circumstances beyond his control. Yet for the first time, the plan no longer existed as a fantasy. It had begun evolving into a sequence of practical problems waiting for practical solutions. Every observation increased both hope and risk. The more clearly he understood the system, the more he realized that there would probably be only one opportunity, and once it arrived there could be no hesitation. Until that unknown day appeared, he continued blending into the daily routine, watching, listening, remembering, and preparing in complete silence while those around him remained unaware that an extraordinary plan was slowly taking shape behind an expression that revealed nothing at all. Days of careful observation gradually transformed scattered details into a single dangerous conclusion. The prisoner no longer looked at the camp as an endless maze of fences and buildings. Instead, he began seeing it as a network of routines connected by predictable human behavior. Every office depended on paperwork arriving at specific hours. Every checkpoint expected familiar faces. Every corridor reflected habits repeated so often that few people questioned them. The realization did not make the situation less dangerous, but it revealed something that had remained hidden beneath the appearance of absolute control. Systems built on routine could become vulnerable to anyone patient enough to understand them. He therefore shifted his attention toward the individuals who moved most freely throughout the administrative areas. Certain officers followed nearly identical routes every day. Some preferred quiet efficiency, while others paused for conversations. Clerks carried folders between offices with remarkable consistency. Vehicles arrived, unloaded supplies, departed, and returned according to schedules that rarely changed. None of these observations seemed significant on their own, yet together they formed a detailed map of opportunity. Rather than searching for a dramatic opening, he searched for ordinary moments that everyone else ignored. He understood that extraordinary escapes would never succeed through extraordinary behavior. They would succeed only by appearing completely ordinary. One lesson became increasingly clear. Authority inside the camp depended as much upon confidence as upon official appearance. Personnel who belonged there rarely hesitated before entering a building, speaking to another official, or walking through controlled areas. They expected cooperation because the system itself reinforced that expectation. The prisoner quietly practiced remembering these subtle details. The angle of a salute, the relaxed pace of experienced officers, the way documents were carried beneath one arm instead of clutched tightly with nervous hands. Even the direction someone looked while crossing a courtyard seemed different when they truly believed they belonged there. None of this required imitation yet. First, it required understanding. The greatest obstacle remained obvious. Clothing alone could never create a convincing disguise. Every visible detail would need to support the illusion, and every action would need to match the role perfectly. A single uncertain glance, a misplaced step, or an unfamiliar response could unravel everything within seconds. That reality forced him to think beyond appearances. If an opportunity ever arrived, success would depend on preparation completed long before the first step toward freedom. Meanwhile, daily life continued exactly as before. Work assignments changed. Administrative routines repeated. Weather shifted with the passing seasons. Yet behind an expression carefully emptied of emotion, his mind continued assembling hundreds of observations into one coherent plan. Then something unexpected happened. During an ordinary day that appeared no different from countless others, he noticed a sequence of administrative movements unlike those he had studied before. Temporary personnel changes, unusual document transfers, and altered responsibilities briefly disrupted familiar routines. The interruption lasted only a short time, but it proved something important. Even the most disciplined organizations occasionally experienced moments of adjustment. Those moments created uncertainty, and uncertainty demanded decisions made more quickly than usual. For the first time, the impossible idea stopped feeling entirely theoretical. He still possessed no guarantee of success and no clear date for action, but he now understood exactly what he had been waiting to discover. Somewhere within the machinery of routine existed brief moments when certainty disappeared, and if he could recognize one of those moments before it vanished, the plan that had lived silently inside his thoughts for so long might finally become reality. The possibility that had existed only in careful observation now demanded something far more difficult: preparation without certainty. The prisoner understood that no plan could depend upon perfect conditions because perfect conditions rarely appeared. Instead, every small advantage would need to be earned long before the decisive moment arrived. He therefore continued blending into the routines that had protected him from unwanted attention for so long. Nothing about his outward behavior changed. He completed ordinary assignments with the same measured pace. He spoke only when necessary. He avoided drawing notice from both fellow prisoners and camp personnel. The greatest protection for any extraordinary plan remained complete invisibility. Behind that quiet exterior, however, his mind rehearsed possibilities repeatedly. He imagined walking through administrative corridors without hesitation. He pictured how an experienced officer carried himself, where his eyes focused, how quickly he acknowledged another official before continuing on his way. Confidence could not be borrowed at the last second. It had to become natural enough that even under enormous pressure, every movement appeared ordinary. The smallest inconsistency might invite a second glance, and a second glance could destroy months of preparation. More importantly, he recognized that appearance alone would never be enough. Every document, every route, every decision would need to fit naturally within the daily rhythm he had spent. So much time studying. If someone expected paperwork, paperwork needed to appear. If someone expected an officer to know where he was going, uncertainty could never be visible. The plan therefore became less about disguise and more about understanding expectations. People usually saw what they believed should already be there. His challenge would be to become one more familiar detail inside a system built upon familiar details. Time continued passing without presenting the opportunity he needed. Days became weeks, and weeks slowly blended together. At moments he questioned whether the chance would ever come. Yet each additional day also strengthened his understanding of the environment. Temporary personnel changes occurred from time to time. Administrative duties shifted between offices. Supply deliveries occasionally altered the normal flow of movement through certain areas. These rare adjustments confirmed what he had already suspected. Even highly organized systems experience brief periods when routines became less predictable. Those moments remained dangerous, but they also created possibilities that never existed during perfectly ordinary days. Then another important observation quietly changed everything. He noticed that authority often moved more freely than anyone else because very few people expected to challenge it. Guards focused their attention outward. Clerks concentrated on paperwork. Drivers hurried to their assigned destinations. Each person trusted that someone else had already verified what needed verifying. It was not carelessness so much as confidence in a structure that had functioned the same way for a long time. For the first time, The prisoner understood exactly where the real challenge lay. Escaping would not require outrunning anyone. It would require becoming so completely believable that no one felt the need to ask a single additional question. That realization transformed months of quiet observation into a practical objective. Every lesson, every remembered detail, every carefully studied routine now pointed toward one inevitable conclusion. When the right moment finally arrived, there would be no opportunity to think, only to perform a role so convincingly that the machinery surrounding him accepted it without hesitation. Somewhere ahead, hidden within the ordinary flow of another seemingly unremarkable day, the chance he had been preparing for was drawing closer than ever before. After countless days spent preparing for an opportunity that might never arrive, the first pieces of the puzzle finally began to align. The prisoner noticed subtle changes that would have escaped almost everyone else. Administrative assignments shifted unexpectedly. Several officers followed unfamiliar schedules, while temporary responsibilities passed between departments. Messengers carried larger bundles of paperwork than usual, moving quickly from one office to another with little time to question routine requests. The entire system continued functioning, yet beneath its orderly appearance small adjustments created moments of uncertainty. He immediately understood that these brief disruptions were exactly what he had been waiting for. They would not last long, and they might never happen again in quite the same way. Instead of reacting impulsively, he remained patient. Every instinct urged him to believe that the opportunity had finally arrived, but months of observation had taught him that impatience destroyed even the most carefully prepared plans. He continued performing his assigned duties exactly as before, while quietly confirming whether the unusual patterns would continue into the following day. To his surprise, they did. New personnel appeared in places normally occupied by familiar faces. Documents traveled through different offices before reaching their destinations. Individuals who usually questioned every detail now seemed focused on completing their expanding workload as efficiently as possible. The machinery of administration still operated, but its perfect rhythm had become slightly uneven. During those same days, another realization strengthened his confidence. He observed that authority often depended upon expectation rather than constant verification. People standing at checkpoints expected officers to possess legitimate reasons for their movements. Clerks expected official documents to arrive from authorized sources. Drivers expected instructions from superiors whose authority appeared unquestionable. Every individual trusted the broader system to confirm what they themselves never had time to examine closely. That understanding became the foundation of everything that followed. If he could fit naturally into those expectations, the system itself might unknowingly carry him toward freedom. Yet he never confused possibility with certainty. Every step still contained enormous risk. He therefore reviewed every detail repeatedly inside his mind. He imagined walking through familiar corridors with measured confidence. He rehearsed maintaining steady eye contact without appearing confrontational. He reminded himself that hesitation often attracted more attention than confidence. Even breathing needed to remain calm because nervous movements could communicate uncertainty more loudly than words ever could. The greatest challenge was no longer creating a plan. It was trusting that months of careful preparation had become part of his own instincts. Around him, ordinary life continued. Workers completed assignments. Vehicles entered and departed according to revised schedules. Offices remained busy with paperwork moving from desk to desk. To everyone else, these were simply busy administrative days. To the prisoner, they represented a narrow opening hidden inside ordinary routine. For the first time, he believed that the impossible might truly become achievable. The path ahead remained dangerously uncertain, but uncertainty no longer discouraged him. Instead, it confirmed that events had finally moved beyond theory. Soon there would be no more studying, no more rehearsing, and no more waiting. The knowledge gathered through months of patience would have to withstand the ultimate test. When the decisive morning arrived, success would depend upon whether every observation had been remembered correctly and whether the confidence he had practiced in silence could convince an entire system that it was looking exactly where it expected to look. Morning arrived without announcing itself as extraordinary. The same distant sounds echoed across the camp. Administrative offices opened according to familiar routines. Vehicles entered through designated checkpoints. Clerks organized documents into orderly stacks while officers and support personnel moved between buildings with practiced confidence. To everyone watching, it appeared to be another ordinary day inside a system built upon repetition. Only one man understood that every ordinary detail surrounding him had become part of a carefully studied sequence leading toward a single irreversible decision. Months of observation had prepared him for this moment, yet preparation could never remove uncertainty. It could only reduce the number of unknowns. Before taking a single step, he reminded himself that success depended upon appearing completely unremarkable. Nothing about his pace could suggest urgency. Nothing about his expression could reveal fear. Confidence would have to replace instinct, because instinct urged him to look over his shoulder, to hesitate before every doorway, and to question every movement. Instead, he relied upon the countless hours he had spent studying those who naturally belonged within the administrative structure. He remembered that experienced officers rarely hurried. They walked with purpose, but never with visible tension. They acknowledged familiar faces with brief confidence rather than lengthy conversation. They expected doors to open before them because the system had conditioned everyone else to respond automatically. Every observation now became part of his own performance. As he moved through areas he had memorized long before, familiar routines unfolded exactly as expected. Messengers crossed courtyards carrying paperwork. Drivers prepared vehicles for scheduled assignments. Guards concentrated on responsibilities already occupying their attention. Every individual remained focused upon completing ordinary tasks rather than searching for extraordinary events. The prisoner understood that this was the greatest advantage routine could offer. People naturally concentrated upon what they expected to see, especially during busy periods when dozens of responsibilities competed for attention. He therefore allowed the rhythm of the surrounding environment to guide his own movements. Each successful step strengthened his confidence, yet he resisted the temptation to believe the hardest part had already passed. The most dangerous mistake would be relaxing too early. Every checkpoint still demanded complete composure. Every encounter still required absolute consistency. A single uncertain response could undo months of preparation within seconds. Rather than thinking about freedom waiting somewhere beyond the camp, he narrowed his focus to the next doorway, the next courtyard, the next ordinary exchange that needed to appear entirely routine. This discipline kept emotion from overwhelming judgment. Time itself seemed strangely different. Moments that lasted only seconds felt far longer because every observation carried enormous importance. Yet the camp around him continued operating with complete indifference. Offices remained busy. Vehicles continued arriving and departing. Conversations rose and faded naturally. Nothing suggested that history might quietly be changing within those familiar surroundings. Gradually, the boundary between careful preparation and decisive action disappeared. There was no dramatic signal marking the transition. One measured step simply followed another until the plan existed no longer as an idea, but as reality unfolding in real time. Whether the final stage would succeed remained unknown, but one truth had already become impossible to deny. The impossible had progressed farther than anyone inside that carefully organized world would ever have believed. Ahead waited the final test, where every lesson learned through patience, observation, and unwavering self-control would determine whether the journey ended in freedom or remained forever an unfinished story. Beyond the final checkpoint, the landscape changed almost immediately, but danger did not disappear with the fences behind him. For months he had imagined what freedom might feel like, yet the first emotion that arrived was not relief. It was caution. Every lesson learned inside the camp remained just as important outside its boundaries. The uniform that had helped carry him through the controlled routines of the administrative system now demanded even greater discipline. He understood that every road, railway station, village, and military position across occupied territory still functioned within a much larger network of authority. One careless decision could draw attention from people who had never seen him before. His greatest protection remained exactly what it had been throughout the escape itself, appearing completely ordinary. He continued moving with deliberate confidence, resisting every instinct to hurry. Experience had taught him that people often remembered those who behaved unusually, while those who blended naturally into familiar surroundings passed almost unnoticed. Whenever he encountered routine activity, he observed before acting. He watched how others entered buildings, where vehicles stopped, how official conversations began and ended, and how personnel carried themselves during ordinary duties. Every observation allowed him to adjust without attracting unnecessary attention. Although he had successfully crossed the boundary that once seemed impossible to overcome, the journey ahead remained uncertain. The farther he traveled from the camp, the more he recognized that survival depended upon patience rather than celebration. He could not assume that safety waited just beyond the next road or beyond the next village. Instead, he focused on making one correct decision after another, allowing discipline to guide every movement. During quiet moments, the contrast between his former existence and his present circumstances felt almost impossible to comprehend. Only a short time earlier, every hour had been controlled by fixed schedules and constant supervision. Now each decision belonged entirely to him. That freedom carried its own responsibility because every choice influenced what might happen next. Rather than becoming overwhelmed by possibilities, he narrowed his attention to immediate objectives. Find the safest direction. Avoid unnecessary attention. Preserve the calm confidence that had carried him this far. Step by step, the extraordinary escape continued not through dramatic action, but through countless ordinary decisions made with extraordinary care. As days passed, distance gradually replaced immediate danger, yet uncertainty never completely vanished. Reliable communication remained difficult, trusted contacts were limited, and occupied Europe offered few guarantees to anyone traveling under unusual circumstances. According to historical accounts associated with remarkable wartime escapes, survival after leaving captivity often required as much resilience as the escape itself. Reaching freedom was rarely a single moment. It was a process measured through careful judgment, adaptability, and remarkable emotional control. Looking back, the prisoner understood that the most important transformation had begun long before he crossed any gate. It had started the day he decided to replace despair with observation, fear with patience, and impossible dreams with practical preparation. Those choices had carried him farther than anyone inside the carefully ordered system could have imagined. Yet even as the distance between himself and the camp slowly increased, one final question remained unanswered. Could the extraordinary journey of one anonymous prisoner ever be confirmed by history? Or would it disappear into the uncertainty of wartime memory, waiting decades for scattered evidence to reveal what had truly happened? As the war gradually came to an end, the urgency of survival gave way to another challenge that was often just as complicated, separating verified history from stories that had grown through repeated retelling. Across Europe, investigators, military authorities, journalists, and historians began collecting documents, personal testimonies, transport records, administrative files, and surviving correspondence in an effort to understand what had happened inside places that had once been hidden behind layers of secrecy. Every recovered document added another fragment to a much larger historical picture, while every survivor who chose to speak contributed memories that no official archive could fully preserve. Yet historians also understood that memory alone could not answer every question. Extraordinary claims required extraordinary evidence, particularly when describing escapes that appeared almost impossible. That careful approach is why researchers continue comparing eyewitness accounts with surviving records whenever remarkable stories emerge. In the case of accounts describing a prisoner leaving Auschwitz under the appearance of an SS officer, historians have emphasized the importance of examining each source critically rather than accepting dramatic details without documentation. Wartime confusion, incomplete archives, destroyed records, and the passage of time all complicated efforts to reconstruct every event with complete certainty. Even so, one conclusion appears repeatedly throughout scholarly research on successful escapes from Nazi concentration camps. The individuals who survived did so not because of extraordinary luck alone, but because they combined patience, observation, planning, adaptability, and remarkable emotional discipline. Those qualities appear consistently across documented escape narratives regardless of the specific methods employed. For that reason, this story ultimately becomes larger than one individual or one dramatic moment. It illustrates how careful observation could become a form of resistance, how knowledge of routine could become a survival tool, and how hope sometimes survived even within systems deliberately designed to remove it. Researchers today continue preserving original camp records, official correspondence, architectural plans, transportation documents, photographs, and survivor interviews because every verified source strengthens our understanding of this period in history. Museums and educational institutions likewise encourage visitors to distinguish between documented evidence, personal testimony, and later interpretations so that historical memory remains as accurate as possible. This careful commitment to evidence honors not only those who survived, but also those whose experiences can only be reconstructed through surviving archives. As more collections have become available to scholars over recent decades, our understanding of life inside Auschwitz has continued evolving, revealing new details while correcting earlier assumptions. That process reminds us that history is not preserved by repeating the most dramatic version of a story, but by patiently assembling the strongest available evidence. The remarkable account followed throughout this documentary, therefore, stands at the intersection of courage and historical investigation. The escape itself captures attention because it seems almost unbelievable. The effort to verify exactly how such an escape could have unfolded reflects another kind of determination, the determination of historians who continue searching for truth long after the events themselves have passed. With the evidence gathered, the testimony examined, and the broader historical context now established, one final question remains. Why has this extraordinary story continued capturing the imagination of generations, and what lasting lesson does it leave for those who encounter it today through the careful study of history rather than through legend alone? Looking back across the entire journey, the most remarkable aspect of this story is not simply that one prisoner managed to move beyond the fences of Auschwitz, but that every step depended upon qualities that cannot be measured by physical strength alone. Patience became a survival skill. Observation became preparation. Self-control became protection. Long before the escape itself began, the real transformation had already taken place inside the mind of a man who refused to believe that careful thought had no value even under the harshest circumstances. Whether studying routines, remembering countless small details, or waiting for a moment that might never come, he demonstrated a truth that appears throughout many documented wartime survival stories. Extraordinary outcomes are often built upon hundreds of ordinary decisions made with remarkable discipline. At the same time, history asks us to approach stories like this with both curiosity and responsibility. The suffering experienced within Auschwitz was real, thoroughly documented, and preserved through survivor testimony, official records, photographs, architectural evidence, and decades of scholarly research. Those historical facts remain the foundation upon which every serious discussion must rest. Individual escape accounts, especially those containing dramatic elements involving disguise or assumed identities, deserve careful examination against the strongest available evidence. Responsible historical storytelling therefore celebrates courage without abandoning accuracy, recognizing both the power of personal testimony and the importance of documented verification. That balance allows remarkable stories to inspire while remaining faithful to the historical record. In many ways, the escape itself represents only one chapter of a much larger human story. What truly endures is the reminder that even systems designed to eliminate hope could never completely control the human ability to observe, think, adapt, and dream of freedom. Across Europe, museums, memorials, preserved campsites, educational programs, and historical archives continue protecting these memories so future generations can understand not only what happened, but also why remembrance remains essential. Visitors who walk through those places today encounter more than buildings and artifacts. They encounter evidence collected with extraordinary care so that history can be studied honestly rather than forgotten. Every preserved document, every survivor interview, every restored photograph, and every carefully researched publication contributes another piece to that responsibility. For modern audiences, the greatest lesson may not be found in the mechanics of an escape alone. Instead, It lies in recognizing how easily ordinary routines can shape human behavior, how valuable critical thinking becomes when facing impossible circumstances, and why historical truth deserves patient investigation rather than simple repetition. The anonymous prisoner, whose journey we have followed, symbolizes resilience more than spectacle. His story reminds us that courage is often quiet, preparation is frequently invisible, and hope sometimes survives through the smallest acts of determination. Whether remembered through documented records, scholarly research, or preserved historical sites, the legacy of those who endured Auschwitz continues to challenge every generation to value truth, protect human dignity, and ensure that the lessons of history remain living knowledge rather than distant memory. In the end, that may be the most enduring victory of all, because while walls, uniforms, and systems eventually disappeared, the determination to preserve the truth has continued far beyond the war itself.